Right now, you are probably getting ready to dump a $30 bottle of blue chemical sludge onto your tomatoes, completely unaware that you are actively killing up to 70% of the microscopic life in your soil. It's a $200 billion industry built on a brilliant, totally legal scam. Actually, wait, let me step back. Hi, I'm Paul Cheng, and I've spent the last decade watching homesteaders and everyday homeowners just bleed cash trying to force a decent harvest out of dead dirt. You go down to the big box store, you catch that sharp, powdery ammonia smell in the garden aisle, and you buy the lie that your soil is broken and needs their expensive fix just to grow a simple cucumber. The chemical companies have jacked up retail prices by almost 300% recently, and they know you'll pay it because you think you have no choice. If you were tired of treating your backyard like a chemical dependency ward and getting ripped off season after season, go ahead and hit subscribe, because the truth is, your plants don't need a patented corporate formula. They need a biological stress trigger. And the craziest part is, the exact compound needed to force your garden into a massive panic-induced fruiting cycle is probably sitting right now in your bathroom medicine cabinet, and it costs about $1. Let's talk about the big four. You know the names, or at least you know their brands when you see those brightly colored jugs stacked to the ceiling at the hardware store. Nutrien, Yara International, Mosaic, CF Industries. These giants have engineered a perfect self-sustaining dependency loop. See, when you pour their synthetic NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, into your garden beds, it gives the plants a massive, immediate hit of soluble nutrients. It's basically a botanical sugar rush. You see green leaves shooting up and you think, wow, this stuff is a miracle. But what you don't see, what's happening just an inch below the surface, is a massacre. Those synthetic salts are actively burning out the natural symbiotic fungi in your dirt, the mycorrhizae. Without that microscopic life, your soil isn't soil anymore. It's just a dead, lifeless sponge that is now physically incapable of feeding your plants on its own. So, what happens next spring? Your tomatoes look weak, the leaves are yellowing, and you are forced to go back and buy another $30 bottle of blue liquid just to keep them alive. It is a brilliant business model if you don't mind destroying the earth, and it's incredibly lucrative. During the recent supply chain crunches, while you and I were paying double or triple for basic gardening supplies, some of these top fertilizer producers reported their net earnings jumping by over 200%. I used to think the price spikes were just normal inflation, but looking at their quarterly reports, actually, let me rephrase that. Inflation is real, sure, but when a company doubles its profit margin during a crisis, that's just extortion. They're milking us dry because they believe we are trapped, but we're not. The way out of this trap is understanding how a plant actually operates in the wild when it's stressed, not when it's being spoon-fed chemicals. In nature, when a plant gets attacked by a pest or a disease, it produces a specific hormone to trigger its immune system. That hormone is salicylic acid. It is the exact same active ingredient found in standard everyday aspirin. When you introduce a tiny diluted amount of salicylic acid to your garden, you are essentially hacking the plant's central nervous system. It's called systemic acquired resistance. You trick the plant into believing it is under a severe, life-threatening attack. The plant panics, but in a good way. It instantly thickens its cell walls to defend against insects, and more importantly, it shifts all of its energy into reproductive overdrive. It thinks it might die, so it races to produce as many flowers and fruits as mathematically possible to ensure its genetics survive to the next generation. We are talking legitimate yield increases of 30 to over 100% in things like tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, just from a $1 bottle of pills. But there's a second half to this equation, and this is where most people get it wrong. Forcing the plant to fruit requires raw materials, and since you aren't dumping synthetic fertilizer into the dirt anymore, you have to unlock the nutrients that are already trapped in your soil. Most backyard dirt actually has plenty of phosphorus and potassium naturally sitting right there, but it's chemically locked up in a rigid mineral form that the plant roots physically cannot absorb. To break that lock, you don't need a lab-grade chemical. You just need a jar of blackstrap molasses from the grocery store. It sounds ridiculous, I know. I laughed the first time an old commercial farmer told me about it, but the science is bulletproof. The indigenous bacteria in your soil are starving. When you mix a spoonful of unsulfured molasses into your watering can, it smells earthy, almost like a damp, sweet brewery. You pour that thick, sticky liquid onto the dirt, and the bacteria go into an absolute feeding frenzy. They multiply by the billions, and as they consume the sugars, they excrete specific enzymes that act like microscopic pickaxes, chipping away at those locked up minerals and spoon-feeding free organic NPK right into the roots of your screaming, hyperactive plants. It is a beautiful, closed-loop biological machine that costs literal pennies to run. But there is a massive catch. If you just walk outside right now, crush up an aspirin and throw it in a spray bottle, you are going to walk out tomorrow morning and find your entire garden permanently ruined. The leaves will be scorched black, crisping up and dying off in the sun, and you'll have lost your entire season's food supply in a single afternoon. Executing this hack requires a very specific delivery method, and if you don't use the exact right type of equipment and timing, that cheap acid will physically burn your plants to the ground. You see, the biggest mistake people make when they hear about the aspirin trick is they just grab whatever plastic spray bottle is sitting empty under the kitchen sink, toss a whole pill in some water, and go to town. But if you've ever actually tried to drop a modern store-bought aspirin into a glass of cold water, you know exactly what happens. It does absolutely nothing. It just sits there at the bottom of the glass like a little white rock. That is because almost all of them have this heavy, glossy polymer coating baked onto the outside to make it easy to swallow. You have to physically break that protective shell. I usually take a heavy ceramic mortar and pestle, or honestly just the back of a thick metal spoon against a wooden cutting board, and aggressively crush that standard 325 milligram pill until it breaks down into a fine, chalky powder. You will actually feel the dry grit of it grinding under the metal. Once it is completely pulverized, you dump that powder into a gallon of room temperature water, maybe add a single drop of mild dish soap so the solution actually clings to the plant instead of just rolling off into the dirt, and you shake it vigorously. Now here is exactly where the disaster happens and where people ruin their gardens. If you pour that acid mix into one of those cheap plastic dollar store trigger bottles and start blasting your delicate tomato plants at noonday, you are basically playing God with a magnifying glass.
Those cheap trigger mechanisms spit out huge, uneven, heavy globs of water. When the intense midday sun hits those massive water beads sitting on the leaves, it magnifies the heat, and the salicylic acid literally boils the plant tissue. You'll actually smell this faint, sharp, grassy odor of burning foliage right there in the yard. By the next morning, your leaves will be covered in these dead, crispy brown necrotic spots. It is completely heartbreaking. Actually, let me be totally clear about this, because it is the exact reason my very first heirloom crop failed years ago. You cannot use a standard trigger bottle. You have to create a microscopic suspended mist so the tiny pores on the underside of the leaves can absorb the acid instantly without the water pooling up. The only way to get that atomized floating cloud of moisture is with a continuous pressure pump sprayer, specifically one built with an adjustable brass nozzle. It is entirely non-negotiable if you want to do this safely. You pump the handle until the pressure builds, twist that heavy brass tip until it breathes out a fine fog, and you coat the leaves at dawn or dusk, right when the hot sun is completely off them. Then comes the dirt drench. You take your watering can, drop in 1 single tablespoon of blackstrap molasses, and stir. It immediately turns the water this dark, murky brown color, and if you accidentally get a drop on your patio concrete, it dries into a sticky black glue that takes a stiff wire brush to scrub off. But here is the ultimate trap that the chemical companies absolutely love. Most folks just grab whatever cheap baking molasses is on sale at the local grocery store, completely missing the microscopic print on the back label that says it was processed with sulfur dioxide. Sulfur is a highly potent antimicrobial. If you pour sulfured molasses onto your soil, you're essentially dropping a nuclear bomb on the exact microbial life you're trying to feed. You will sterilize your dirt overnight. You absolutely have to source pure, unsulfured blackstrap molasses, the raw horticultural stuff, or this entire biological engine just seizes up.
Let's look at the funding. You think the big agricultural extensions at these prestigious state universities are independent, but if you actually pull their annual grant reports, the names writing the massive checks are the exact same chemical giants we talked about earlier. They pour tens of millions into these agronomy departments every single year. So, when a bright grad student wants to run a multi-year trial on crop yields, the study is fundamentally designed from day one to test which proprietary, patented synthetic chemical formulation works best. Actually, wait. That makes it sound like some sinister, smoky room conspiracy. It's really not. Let me be fair here. It is just basic cold corporate math. You literally cannot patent the concept of dissolving a generic aspirin tablet in tap water. You cannot copyright the biological process of feeding native soil bacteria with cheap sugar. Because there's zero exclusive intellectual property to protect here, there is zero marketing budget. No company in their right mind is going to spend $5 million on clinical field trials to prove that a 2-cent pill can completely replace their $30 flagship product. So the research just never gets funded. The science is buried by apathy. And that translates directly to what you see in the real world. The garden center manager at your local store allocates retail shelf space based entirely on profit margins and wholesale vendor agreements. A massive end cap of heavy, neon-colored liquid fertilizer jugs guarantees high-margin repeat purchases every single month of the growing season. Teaching a customer to walk past the garden center, go into the grocery aisle, and buy a single bottle of pills and a jar of molasses that will last them for 3 entire seasons, that offers the retail store absolutely nothing. I remember standing in the middle of a massive hardware store last spring, just watching people load up these heavy, squeaky orange flatbed carts with bags of synthetic NPK granules. The plastic bags were coated in that fine, chalky chemical dust that instantly dries out your skin on the hands the second you touch it. I just wanted to shake them and tell them they were paying a premium to slowly murder their own property. But people just don't know. We've been aggressively conditioned through decades of very clever, very expensive advertising to believe that nature is somehow defective and requires a corporate intervention to function properly. But nature isn't defective. It is just waiting for the right biological triggers. When you finally stop fighting your soil and start working with it, the results are staggering. You take that crushed white powder, you dissolve it in your continuous pressure sprayer, you mist it in the cool, still evening air when the sun is finally dropping behind the trees, and you follow it up with that dark, sticky, unsulfured molasses drench. You do that just once every 3 weeks. That is the whole secret. Within a month, you'll physically feel the difference. You'll run your fingers over the main stems of your tomato plants and notice they've thickened up, turning this deep, resilient, almost armored green. You'll see massive clusters of flowers setting heavy fruit instead of shriveling and dropping off in the summer heat. You completely sever your reliance on a fragile, overpriced supply chain. You stop funding the Goliath that wants to keep you dependent, and you finally take back control of your own food supply. The fertilizer giants are banking on you being too lazy to crush a pill and pump a handle. They're betting billions of dollars that you will just take the easy way out and buy their blue sludge. It is entirely up to you to prove them wrong.